The Statue of Liberty, or Liberty Enlightening the World, is a colossal neoclassical sculpture located on Liberty Island in New York Harbor, within New York City. The copper-clad statue, a gift to the United States from the people of France, was designed by French sculptor Frédéric Auguste Bartholdi, and its metal framework was built by Gustave Eiffel. The statue was dedicated on October 28, 1886. The statue is a figure of a classically draped woman, likely inspired by the Roman goddess of liberty, Libertas. In a contrapposto pose, she holds a torch above her head with her right hand, and in her left hand carries a tabula ansata inscribed July 4 MDC Clexteenth, or July 4, 1776 in Roman numerals, the date of the U.S. Declaration of Independence. With her left foot, she steps on a broken chain and shackle, commemorating the national abolition of slavery following the American Civil War. After its dedication, the statue became an icon of freedom and of the United States, being subsequently seen as a symbol of welcome to immigrants arriving by sea. The idea for the statue was conceived in 1865, when the French historian and abolitionist Édouard de Laboulaye proposed a monument to commemorate the upcoming centennial of U.S. independence in 1876, the perseverance of American democracy, and the liberation of the nation's slaves. The Franco-Prussian War delayed progress until 1875, when Laboulaye proposed that the people of France finance the statue and the United States provide the site and build the pedestal. Bartholdi completed the head and the torch-bearing arm before the statue was fully designed, and these pieces were exhibited for publicity at international expositions. The torch-bearing arm was displayed at the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia in 1876, and in Madison Square Park in Manhattan, from 1876 to 1882. Fundraising proved difficult, especially for the Americans, and by 1885 work on the pedestal was threatened by lack of funds. Publisher Joseph Pulitzer of the New York World started a drive for donations to finish the project, and attracted more than 120,000 contributors, most of whom gave less than $1, which is equivalent to $34 in 2023. The statue was built in France, shipped overseas in crates, and assembled on the completed pedestal on what was then called Bedloe's Island. The statue's completion was marked by New York's first ticker tape parade, and a dedication ceremony presided over by President Grover Cleveland. The statue was administered by the United States Lighthouse Board until 1901, and then by the Department of War. Since 1933, it has been maintained by the National Park Service as part of the Statue of Liberty National Monument, and is a major tourist attraction. The project is traced to a mid-1865 conversation between Laboulaye, a staunch abolitionist, and Frédéric Auguste Bartholdi, a sculptor. In after-dinner conversation at his home near Versailles, Laboulaye, an ardent supporter of the Union in the American Civil War, is supposed to have said, "If a monument should rise in the United States as a memorial to their independence, I should think it only natural if it were built by a united effort, a common work of both our nations." The National Park Service, in a 2000 report, however, deemed this a legend traced to an 1885 fundraising pamphlet, and that the statue was most likely conceived in 1870. In another essay on their website, the Park Service suggested that Laboulaye was minded to honor the Union victory and its consequences. With the abolition of slavery and the Union's victory in the Civil War in 1865, Laboulaye's wishes of freedom and democracy were turning into a reality in the United States. In order to honor these achievements, Laboulaye proposed that a gift be built for the United States on behalf of France. Laboulaye hoped that by calling attention to the recent achievements of the United States, the French people would be inspired to call for their own democracy in the face of a repressive monarchy. According to sculptor Bartholdi, who later recounted the story, Laboulaye's alleged comment was not intended as a proposal, but it inspired Bartholdi. Given the repressive nature of the regime of Napoleon III, Bartholdi took no immediate action on the idea except to discuss it with Laboulaye. Bartholdi was in any event busy with other possible projects. In 1856, he traveled to Egypt to study ancient works. In the late 1860s, he approached Ismail Pasha, Khedive of Egypt, with a plan to build Progress or Egypt, carrying the light to Asia, a huge lighthouse in the form of an ancient Egyptian female fellah or peasant, robed and holding a torch aloft, at the northern entrance to the Suez Canal in Port Said. Sketches and models were made of the proposed work, though it was never erected. There was a classical precedent for the Suez proposal, the Colossus of Rhodes, an ancient bronze statue of the Greek god of the sun, Helios. This statue is believed to have been over 100 feet high, and it similarly stood at a harbor entrance and carried a light to guide ships. Both the Khedive and Ferdinand de Lesseps, developer of the Suez Canal, declined the proposed statue from Bartholdi, citing the high cost. The port-side lighthouse was built instead by François Coignet in 1869. Upon his return from Egypt, Bartholdi visited a 76-foot Giovanni Battista Crespi's sculpture in Repousse copper, covering an iron armature at Lago Maggiore in Italy, and was familiar with the similar construction of the Vercingetorix monument by Aimé Millet. The restoration of Millet's statue a century later called international attention to the Statue of Liberty's poor state. Copper was chosen over bronze or stone due to its lower cost, weight, and ease of transportation. Any large project was further delayed by the Franco-Prussian War, in which Bartholdi served as a major of militia. In the war, Napoleon III was captured and deposed. Bartholdi's home province of Alsace was lost to the Prussians, and a more liberal republic was installed in France. As Bartholdi had been planning a trip to the United States, he and Laboulaye decided the time was right to discuss the idea with influential Americans. In June 1871, Bartholdi crossed the Atlantic with letters of introduction signed by Laboulaye. Arriving at New York Harbor, Bartholdi focused on Bedloes Island, now named Liberty Island, as a site for the statue, struck by the fact that vessels arriving in New York had to sail past it. He was delighted to learn that the island was owned by the United States government. It had been ceded by the New York State Legislature in 1800 for harbor defense. It was thus, as he put it in a letter to Laboulaye, land common to all the states. As well as meeting many influential New Yorkers, Bartholdi visited President Ulysses S. Grant, who assured him that it would not be difficult to obtain the site for the statue. Bartholdi crossed the United States twice by rail, and met many Americans whom he thought would be sympathetic to the project. But he remained concerned that popular opinion on both sides of the Atlantic was insufficiently supportive of the proposal, and he and Laboulaye decided to wait before mounting a public campaign. Bartholdi had made a first model of his concept in 1870. The son of a friend of Bartholdi's, artist John Lafarge, later maintained that Bartholdi made the first sketches for the statue during his visit to Lafarge's Rhode Island studio. Bartholdi continued to develop the concept following his return to France. He also worked on a number of sculptures designed to bolster French patriotism after the defeat by the Prussians. One of these was the Lion of Belfort, a monumental sculpture carved in sandstone below the fortress of Belfort, which during the war had resisted a Prussian siege for over 3 months. The defiant lion, 73 feet long and half that in height, displays an emotional quality characteristic of Romanticism, which Bartholdi would later bring to the Statue of Liberty. Bartholdi and Laboulaye considered how best to express the idea of American liberty. In early American history, 2 female figures were frequently used as cultural symbols of the nation. One of these symbols, the personified Columbia, was seen as an embodiment of the United States in the manner that Britannia was identified with the United Kingdom, and Mary Anne came to represent France. Columbia had supplanted the traditional European personification of the Americas as an Indian princess, which had come to be regarded as uncivilized and derogatory toward Americans. The other significant female icon in American culture was a representation of liberty derived from Libertas, the goddess of freedom widely worshipped in ancient Rome, especially among emancipated slaves. A liberty figure adorned most American coins of the time, and representations of liberty appeared in popular and civic art, including Thomas Crawford's Statue of Freedom, 1863, atop the dome of the United States Capitol building. The statue's design evokes iconography evident in ancient history, including the Egyptian goddess Isis, the ancient Greek deity of the same name, the Roman Columbia, and the Christian iconography of the Virgin Mary. Artists of the 18th and 19th centuries striving to evoke republican ideals commonly used representations of Libertas as an allegorical symbol. A figure of liberty was also depicted on the Great Seal of France. However, Bartholdi and Laboulaye avoided an image of revolutionary liberty such as that depicted in Eugene Delacroix's famed Liberty Leading the People, 1830. In this painting, which commemorates France's July Revolution, a half-clothed Liberty leads an armed mob over the bodies of the fallen. Laboulaye had no sympathy for revolution, and so Bartholdi's figure would be fully dressed in flowing robes. Instead of the impression of violence in the Delacroix work, Bartholdi wished to give the statue a peaceful appearance and chose a torch, representing progress for the figure to hold. Its second toe on both feet is longer than its big toe, a condition known as Morton's toe or Greek foot. This was an aesthetic staple of ancient Greek art and reflects the classical influences on the statue. Crawford's statue was designed in the early 1850s. It was originally to be crowned with a pileus or liberty cap, the cap given to emancipated slaves in ancient Rome. Secretary of War Jefferson Davis, a Southerner who would later serve as President of the Confederate States of America, was concerned that the Peleus would be taken as an abolitionist symbol. He ordered that it be changed to a helmet. Delacroix's figure wears a Peleus, and Bartholdi at first considered placing one on his figure as well. Instead, he used a radiate halo, nimbus, to top its head. In so doing, he avoided a reference to Marianne, who invariably wears a Peleus. Many believe they evoke the sun, the seven seas, and the seven continents, and represent another means besides the torch, whereby liberty enlightens the world, but research has not confirmed this. Bartholdi's early models were all similar in concept. A female figure in neoclassical style representing liberty, wearing a stola and pella, gown and cloak, common in depictions of Roman goddesses, and holding a torch aloft. According to popular accounts, the face was modeled after that of Augusta Charlotte Beiser Bartholdi, the sculptor's mother, but Regis Huber, the curator of the Bartholdi Museum, is on record as saying that this, as well as other similar speculations, have no basis in fact. He designed the figure with austere face and a strong, uncomplicated silhouette, which would be set off well by its dramatic harbor placement and allow passengers on vessels entering New York Bay to experience a changing perspective on the statue as they proceeded toward Manhattan. He gave it bold, classical contours and applied simplified modeling, reflecting the huge scale of the project and its solemn purpose. Bartholdi wrote of his technique, "The surfaces should be broad and simple, defined by a bold and clear design, accentuated in the important places. The enlargement of the details or their multiplicity is to be feared, by exaggerating the forms in order to render them more clearly visible, or by enriching them with details, we would destroy the proportion of the work. Finally, the model, like the design, should have a summarized character, such as one would give to a rapid sketch. Only it is necessary that this character should be the product of volition and study, and that the artist, concentrating his knowledge, should find the form and the line in its greatest simplicity." Bartholdi made alterations in the design as the project evolved. Bartholdi considered having Liberty hold a broken chain, but decided this would be too divisive in the days after the Civil War. The erected statue does stride over a broken chain, half hidden by her robes and difficult to see from the ground. Her right foot is raised and set back, in a classical contrapposto pose that looks stationary when viewed from the front, but dynamic when viewed from the side, signifying a solid footing and a posture more relaxed than that of 2 feet set side by side, and introducing a sense of tension between standing and moving forward, both physically and mentally. The upright form and outstretched leg may have also helped to stabilize the statue. Bartholdi was initially uncertain of what to place in Liberty's left hand. He settled on a tabula ansata, used to evoke the concept of law. Though Bartholdi greatly admired the United States Constitution, he chose to inscribe July the 4th MDC 16th on the tablet, thus associating the date of the country's Declaration of Independence with the concept of liberty. Bartholdi interested his friend and mentor, architect Eugene Viollet-le-Duc, in the project. As chief engineer, Viollet-le-Duc proposed designing a brick pier filled with sand within the statue up to the hips, with iron bars like veins of a leaf to which the skin would be anchored. After consultations with the metalwork foundry Gaget, Gautier & Company, Viollet-le-Duc chose the metal which would be used for the skin, copper sheets, and the method used to shape it, repousse, in which the sheets were heated and then struck with wooden hammers. An advantage of this choice was that the entire statue would be light for its volume, as the copper need be only 0.094 inches or 2.4 millimeters thick. Bartholdi had decided on a height of just over 151 feet, or 46 meters, for the statue, double that of Italy's San Carlone, and the German statue of Arminius, both made with the same method. Viollet-le-Duc also designed the pleats of the dress. By 1875, France was enjoying improved political stability and a recovering post-war economy. Growing interest in the upcoming Centennial Exposition to be held in Philadelphia led Laboulaye to decide it was time to seek public support. In September 1875, he announced the project and the formation of the Franco-American Union as its fundraising arm. With the announcement, the statue was given a name: Liberty, Enlightening the World. The French people were to finance the statue, contrary to the common misconception of it being funded by the French national government, and Americans would be expected to pay for the pedestal. The announcement provoked a generally favorable reaction in France, though many Frenchmen resented the United States for not coming to their aid during the war with Prussia. French monarchists opposed the statue, if for no other reason than it was proposed by the liberal Laboulaye, who had recently been elected a senator for life. Laboulaye arranged events designed to appeal to the rich and powerful, including a special performance at the Paris Opera on April 25, 1876, that featured a new cantata by the composer Charles Gounod. The piece was titled La Liberté éclairant le monde, the French version of the statue's announced name. Initially focused on the elites, the union was successful in raising funds from across French society. School children and ordinary citizens gave, as did 181 French municipalities. Laboulaye's political allies supported the call, as did descendants of the French contingent in the American Revolutionary War. Less idealistically, contributions came from those who hoped for American support in the French attempt to build the Panama Canal. The copper may have come from multiple sources, and some of it is said to have come from a mine in Visness, Norway, though this has not been conclusively determined after testing samples. According to Kara Sutherland in her book on the statue for the Museum of the City of New York, 200,000 pounds or 91,000 kilograms was needed to build the statue, and the French copper industrialist Eugène Secretan donated 128,000 pounds or 58,000 kilograms of copper. Although plans for the statue had not been finalized, Bartholdi moved forward with fabrication of the right arm, bearing the torch, and the head. Work began at the Gadget, Gauthier and Company workshop. In May 1876, Bartholdi traveled to the United States as a member of a French delegation to the Centennial Exhibition and arranged for a huge painting of the statue to be shown in New York as part of the Centennial festivities. The arm did not arrive in Philadelphia until August. Because of its late arrival, it was not listed in the exhibition catalog, and while some reports correctly identified the work, others called it the Colossal Arm, or Bartholdi Electric Light. The exhibition grounds contained a number of monumental artworks to compete for fairgoers' interest, including an outsized fountain designed by Bartholdi. Nevertheless, the arm proved popular in the exhibition's waning days, and visitors would climb up to the balcony of the torch to view the fairgrounds. After the exhibition closed, the arm was transported to New York City, where it remained on display in Madison Square Park for several years before it was returned to France to join the rest of the statue. During his second trip to the United States, Bartholdi addressed a number of groups about the project and urged the formation of American committees of the Franco-American Union. Committees to raise money to pay for the foundation and pedestal were formed in New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. The New York group eventually took on most of the responsibility for American fundraising and is often referred to as the American Committee. One of its members was 19-year-old Theodore Roosevelt, the future governor of New York and President of the United States. On March 3, 1877, on his final full day in office, President Grant signed a joint resolution that authorized the president to accept the statue when it was presented by France and to select a site for it. President Rutherford B. Hayes, who took office the following day, selected the Bedloes Island site that Bartholdi had proposed. On his return to Paris in 1877, Bartholdi concentrated on completing the head, which was exhibited at the 1878 Paris World's Fair. Fundraising continued, with models of the statue put on sale. Tickets to view the construction activity at the Gadget, Gauthier and Company workshop were also offered. The French government authorized a lottery. Among the prizes were valuable silver plate and a terracotta model of the statue. By the end of 1879, about 250,000 francs had been raised. The head and arm had been built with assistance from Viollet-le-Duc, who fell ill in 1879. He soon died, leaving no indication of how he intended to transition from the copper skin to his proposed masonry pier. The following year, Bartholdi was able to obtain the services of the innovative designer and builder Gustave Eiffel. Eiffel and his structural engineer Maurice Koechlin decided to abandon the pier and instead build an iron truss tower. Eiffel opted not to use a completely rigid structure, which would force stresses to accumulate in the skin and lead eventually to cracking. A secondary skeleton was attached to the center pylon, then, to enable the statue to move slightly in the winds of New York Harbor, and since the metal would expand on hot summer days, he loosely connected the support structure to the skin using flat iron bars or springs, which culminated in a mesh of metal straps known as saddles that were riveted to the skin, providing firm support. In a labor-intensive process, each saddle had to be crafted individually. To prevent galvanic corrosion between the copper skin and the iron support structure, Eiffel insulated the skin with asbestos, impregnated with shellac. Eiffel's design made the statue one of the earliest examples of curtain wall construction in which the exterior of the structure is not load-bearing, but is instead supported by an interior framework. He included 2 interior spiral staircases to make it easier for visitors to reach the observation point in the crown. Access to an observation platform surrounding the torch was also provided, but the narrowness of the arm allowed for only a single ladder, 40 feet or 12 meters long. As the pylon tower arose, Eiffel and Bartholdi coordinated their work carefully so that completed segments of skin would fit exactly on the support structure. The components of the pylon tower were built in the Eiffel factory in the nearby Parisian suburb of Levallois-Perret. The change in structural material from masonry to iron allowed Bartholdi to change his plans for the statue's assembly. He had originally expected to assemble the skin on site as the masonry pier was built. Instead, he decided to build the statue in France and have it disassembled and transported to the United States for reassembly in place on Bedloes Island. In a symbolic act, the first rivet placed into the skin, fixing a copper plate onto the statue's big toe, was driven by United States Ambassador to France, Levi P. Morton. The skin was not, however, crafted in exact sequence from low to high. Work proceeded on a number of segments simultaneously in a manner often confusing to visitors. Some work was performed by contractors. One of the fingers was made to Bartholdi's exacting specifications by a coppersmith in the southern French town of Montauban. By 1882, the statue was complete up to the waist, an event Bartholdi celebrated by inviting reporters to lunch on a platform built within the statue. Laboulaye died in 1883. He was succeeded as chairman of the French committee by Lesseps. The completed statue was formally presented to Ambassador Morton at a ceremony in Paris on July 4, 1884, and Lesseps announced that the French government had agreed to pay for its transport to New York. The statue remained intact in Paris pending sufficient progress on the pedestal. By January 1885 this had occurred, and the statue was disassembled and crated for its ocean voyage. The committees in the United States faced great difficulties in obtaining funds for the construction of the pedestal. The Panic of 1873 had led to an economic depression that persisted through much of the decade. The Liberty Statue project was not the only such undertaking that had difficulty raising money. Construction of the obelisk, later known as the Washington Monument, sometimes stalled for years. It would ultimately take over 3.5 decades to complete. There was criticism both of Bartholdi's statue and of the fact that the gift required Americans to foot the bill for the pedestal. In the years following the Civil War, most Americans preferred realistic artworks depicting heroes and events from the nation's history, rather than allegorical works like the Liberty Statue. There was also a feeling that Americans should design American public works. The selection of Italian-born Constantino Brumidi to decorate the Capitol had provoked intense criticism even though he was a naturalized U.S. citizen. Harper's Weekly declared its wish that Monsieur Bartholdi and our French cousins had gone the whole figure while they were about it and given us statue and pedestal at once. The New York Times stated that no true patriot can countenance any such expenditures for bronze females in the present state of our finances. Faced with these criticisms, the American committees took little action for several years. The foundation of Bartholdi's statue was to be laid inside Fort Wood, a disused army base on Bedloes Island constructed between 1807 and 1811. Since 1823 it had rarely been used, though during the Civil War it had served as a recruiting station. The fortifications of the structure were in the shape of an 11-point star. The statue's foundation and pedestal were aligned so that it would face southeast, greeting ships entering the harbor from the Atlantic Ocean. In 1881, the New York Committee commissioned Richard Morris Hunt to design the pedestal. Within months, Hunt submitted a detailed plan, indicating that he expected construction to take about 9 months. He proposed a pedestal 114 feet, or 35 meters, in height. Faced with money problems, the committee reduced that to 89 feet, or 27 meters. Hunt's pedestal design contains elements of classical architecture, including Doric portals, as well as some elements influenced by Aztec architecture. The large mass is fragmented with architectural detail, in order to focus attention on the statue. In form it is a truncated pyramid, 62 feet or 19 meters, square at the base and 39.4 feet or 12 meters at the top. The 4 sides are identical in appearance. Above the door on each side, there are 10 discs upon which Bartholdi proposed to place the coats of arms of the states. Between 1876 and 1889, there were 38 of them, although this was not done. Above that, a balcony was placed on each side, framed by pillars. Bartholdi placed an observation platform near the top of the pedestal, above which the statue itself rises. According to author Louis Auchincloss, the pedestal craggily evokes the power of an ancient Europe over which rises the dominating figure of the Statue of Liberty. The committee hired former Army General Charles Pomeroy Stone to oversee the construction work. Construction on the 15-foot deep, or 4.6 meters, foundation began in 1883, and the pedestal's cornerstone was laid in 1884. In Hunt's original conception, the pedestal was to have been made of solid granite. Financial concerns again forced him to revise his plans. The final design called for poured concrete walls up to 20 feet or 6.1 meters thick, faced with granite blocks. This Stony Creek granite came from the Beatty Quarry in Branford, Connecticut. The concrete mass was the largest poured to that time. Norwegian immigrant civil engineer Joachim Goshen Giever designed the structural framework for the Statue of Liberty. His work involved design computations, detailed fabrication and construction drawings, and oversight of construction. In completing his engineering for the statue's frame, Djever worked from drawings and sketches produced by Gustave Eiffel. Fundraising in the U.S. for the pedestal had begun in 1882. The committee organized a large number of money-raising events. As part of one such effort, an auction of art and manuscripts, poet Emma Lazarus was asked to donate an original work. She initially declined, stating she could not write a poem about a statue. At the time, she was also involved in aiding refugees to New York who had fled anti-Semitic pogroms in Eastern Europe. These refugees were forced to live in conditions that the wealthy Lazarus had never experienced. She saw a way to express her empathy for these refugees in terms of the statue. The resulting sonnet, The New Colossus, including the lines, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free," is uniquely identified with the Statue of Liberty in American culture, and is inscribed on a plaque in its museum. Lazarus's poem contrasted the classical Colossus of Rhodes as a frightening symbol, with the new American Colossus as a beacon to the lost and hopeless. Even with these efforts, fundraising lagged. Grover Cleveland, the governor of New York, vetoed a bill to provide $50,000 for the statue project in 1884. An attempt the next year to have Congress provide $100,000, sufficient to complete the project, also failed. The New York committee, with only $3,000 in the bank, suspended work on the pedestal. With the project in jeopardy, groups from other American cities, including Boston and Philadelphia, offered to pay the full cost of erecting the statue in return for relocating it. Joseph Pulitzer, publisher of the New York World, a New York newspaper, announced a drive to raise $100,000, equivalent to $3,391,000 in 2023. Pulitzer pledged to print the name of every contributor, no matter how small the amount given. The drive captured the imagination of New Yorkers, especially when Pulitzer began publishing the notes he received from contributors. A young girl alone in the world donated 60 cents, the result of self-denial. One donor gave 5 cents as a poor office boy's mite toward the pedestal fund. A group of children sent $1 as the money we saved to go to the circus with. Another $1 was given by a lonely and very aged woman. Residents of a home for alcoholics in New York's rival city of Brooklyn, the cities would not merge until 1898, donated $15. Other drinkers helped out through donation boxes in bars and saloons. A kindergarten class in Davenport, Iowa, mailed the world a gift of $1.35. As the donations flooded in, the committee resumed work on the pedestal. France raised about $250,000 to build the statue, while the United States had to raise up to $300,000 to build the pedestal.
On June 17, 1885, the French steamer Isère arrived in New York with the crates holding the disassembled statue on board. New Yorkers displayed their newfound enthusiasm for the statue. 200,000 people lined the docks, and hundreds of boats put to sea to welcome the ship. After 5 months' daily calls to donate to the statue fund, on August 11, 1885, the world announced that $102,000 had been raised from 120,000 donors, and that 80% of the total had been received in sums of less than $1, which is equivalent to $34 in 2023. Even with the success of the fund drive, the pedestal was not completed until April 1886. Immediately thereafter, reassembly of the statue began. Eiffel's iron framework was anchored to steel I-beams within the concrete pedestal and assembled. Once this was done, the sections of skin were carefully attached. Due to the width of the pedestal, it was not possible to erect scaffolding, and workers dangled from ropes while installing the skin sections. Bartholdi had planned to put floodlights on the torch's balcony to illuminate it. A week before the dedication, the Army Corps of Engineers vetoed the proposal, fearing that ships' pilots passing the statue would be blinded. Instead, Bartholdi cut portholes in the torch, which was covered with gold leaf, and placed the lights inside them. A ceremony of dedication was held on the afternoon of October 28, 1886. President Grover Cleveland, the former New York governor, presided over the event. On the morning of the dedication, a parade was held in New York City. Estimates of the number of people who watched it ranged from several 100,000 to 1 million. President Cleveland headed the procession, then stood in the reviewing stand to see bands and marchers from across America. General Stone was the Grand Marshal of the parade. The route began at Madison Square, once the venue for the Arm, and proceeded to the Battery at the southern tip of Manhattan by way of Fifth Avenue and Broadway, with a slight detour so the parade could pass in front of the World Building on Park Row. When the torch was illuminated on the evening of the statue's dedication, It produced only a faint gleam, barely visible from Manhattan. The world characterized it as more like a glowworm than a beacon. Bartholdi suggested gilding the statue to increase its ability to reflect light, but this proved too expensive. The United States Lighthouse Board took over the Statue of Liberty in 1887 and pledged to install equipment to enhance the torch's effect. In spite of its efforts, the statue remained virtually invisible at night. In 1933, President Franklin Roosevelt ordered the statue to be transferred to the National Park Service. In 1937, the National Park Service gained jurisdiction over the rest of Bedloe's Island. With the Army's departure, the National Park Service began to transform the island into a park. The Works Progress Administration demolished most of the old buildings, regraded and reseeded the eastern end of the island, and built granite steps for a new public entrance to the statue from its rear. Immediately following the September 11th attacks, the statue and Liberty Island were closed to the public. The island reopened at the end of 2001, while the pedestal and statue remained off-limits. The pedestal reopened in August 2004, but the National Park Service announced that visitors could not safely be given access to the statue due to the difficulty of evacuation in an emergency. The Park Service adhered to that position through the remainder of the Bush administration. New York Congressman Anthony Weiner made the statue's reopening a personal crusade. On May 17, 2009, President Barack Obama's Secretary of the Interior, Ken Salazar, announced that as a special gift to America, the statue would be reopened to the public as of July 4th, but that only a limited number of people would be permitted to ascend to the crown each day. Don't forget to subscribe to World Wonders Unveiled and turn on notifications.